Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session at Digital Twin Week. I've lost count now on how many sessions we've had, but thank you for those that are returning, and for our newcomers, we hope you enjoyed this session. My name is Adam Beck. I'm Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council for Australia and New Zealand, and I've had the delight of working with a number of our members at the Smart Cities Council to pull together a whole range of sessions which we're co-hosting with them. And I want to thank the team at Veris who have worked on pulling this panel together. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we kick off for those that haven't gone to our full program and seen what else is on offer for the remainder of the day and also tomorrow. Please head to digitaltwinweek.com. Still plenty of sessions after this one today. We've got 2 more remaining. We head to the UK tonight and New Zealand, and mid-afternoon we talk sort of all things data sharing, optimizing asset performance with the Water Services Association of Australia. And tomorrow we have our industry workshop where we roll up our sleeves and continue to co-create the Australian-New Zealand digital twin strategy that we've been working up. So please feel free to join us for that. We really encourage you to ask questions throughout this panel. Peter and Maureen will be monitoring those questions and directing those to our panelists as required. And for those that want to look back on this session or indeed share this recording with their peers or colleagues, you can do so by heading to our YouTube channel. You'll find it there. Or indeed, you can head straight to the Digital Twin Hub, where all of the sessions are being posted there in our news menu. And while you're there, you can also sign up to our digital twin updates and also check out a whole bunch of resources that we have. Yesterday, we announced that in 2021, we'll be launching the Digital Twin Challenge. When you're at the Digital Twin Hub, check that out. We've currently got registrations of interest open at the moment for local government, state, territory, regional government. We're seeking 10 projects, 10 organisations to come with us on a journey for a year or 2 as we build up some use cases, some model templates for different scenarios. There'll be more information coming. It'll formally launch in March 2021, but early registration of interest open now. So with that, really encouraging you to sit back and enjoy this session. Maureen, I'm going to switch over to you now, give you the reins, and really looking forward to seeing and hearing this session with your guests. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Adam. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody and get started. Hopefully this will happen very quickly. So thanks for coming, everybody. And Veris is really excited to be part of this, Digital Twin Week. My name, as Adam said, is Maureen Benier, and I'm the Urban Design Team Leader at Veris. And joining me is Peter Sipple from Veris. He's the Survey Manager, and we're happy to facilitate this informal discussion today. And our guest speakers are Paul Cassidy, who is Director of Outer Melbourne for the VPA, Victoria Planning Authority. We have Melanie Davin, who is the Director of the Australian Urban Observatory at RMIT. We've got Bronwen Clark, who is the Executive Officer at National Growth Areas Alliance, and Kelly Grisby, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Wyndham City Council. And we also have Dr. Adam Mowlam, who is the Strategic Lead at Digital Twin at DELWP, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And so just with digital twinning, I guess with Veris's ideas on this is that it's imperative to go down that track in the future. And I thought we'd flash in front of you just one of our biggest projects, the Flagstone in southeast Queensland. It's a peat development, 15,000 dwellings. Peter, you're very much across this project and the positives of digital data and digital twinning.
Yes, thank you. No, thank you very much, Maureen. Great to be here and have the opportunity to share today. And Flagstone is certainly a project located in a major growth area southwest of Brisbane. And the ability to actually integrate and understand through the digital twinning process the the information flow as a new development of this scale starts to grow and develop, the planning implications, the future growth implications that you need to be able to bring to play to integrate it back to the main urban development areas in Brisbane City and Logan City and surround it.
And the scale of these projects, this sort of information data is really incredibly helpful, isn't it?
It certainly is, because this indicates you're starting to grow this information right from day one in terms of the digital capture of the horizontal physical layouts, concept, design, and then starting to integrate that back into the other fabric, urban fabric that surrounds it. And it helps you immensely to understand and make decisions in a very quick and effective way.
Well, I guess if we move on to the next screen, I think it's really important for everybody to understand what actually is digital twinning, and therefore why it's important for it to move into the greenfield and regional areas. And we have Dr. Adam Mowlam, who was happy to give us a quick rundown on that. So I will stop sharing and hand the reins over to you, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, my name's Dr. Adam Mowlam, and I lead I'm the strategic lead for digital twins at DELWP. So it's a significant role within the Victorian state government to work on digital twins. I actually have come from a local government background, working in both the smart city space in a growth council. So I've got a very quite a unique perspective on this this topic, and it's fantastic to be here, and I appreciate the invite. So as mentioned, I am going to talk about digital twins. What is it? So, you know, I think there's, you know, the concept of digital twins has been around for decades, really. But what's changed in the conversation is this concept of a spatial digital twin, and that's been enabled by, you know, cheaper access to digital data. It's been enabled by different sensors that have been able to be rolled out across cities, and we've seen a lot of that through smart city programs, you know, particularly the federal government work, the Smart Cities and Suburbs program. So, you know, it's really a concept that can go as deep as we actually want to. What level of replication of a city do we actually choose to take? And obviously, depending on that scale of replication, will be dictated by the use cases that are of interest to each particular organisation or subject area. So, you know, the challenge of digital twins is really the point that cities are incredibly complex. You know, I've got here two different examples that go sort of a little bit beyond, you know, sort of planning and visualization, where I talk about live travel information. So, you know, we use an example in state government. If someone happens to, you know, drive a truck and hit a bridge, and then that shuts down an entire transport system, what does that mean, and how does that impact travel? But, you know, what does it mean in terms of how do we go and maintain that bridge if we've got sensors on that bridge? That's a digital replication of the bridge and the transport system. I've also shown here a really nice diagram of 3D trees. Now, we've talked about you know, different data capture points that are used in bringing these digital twins to life. You know, we're still working through these really complex elements of building visualization techniques of cities, and trees are one of the most complex things to actually map. You know, the slightest bit of wind will throw out a 3D model, you know, from something that looks, you know, quite awful to something that looks really nice. So one of our key projects and one of the key things when we talk about visualization is trees and the impact of shadowing and the like. So that's a nice little illustration of some of the work that we're doing in the Victorian government. Now, the last thing I sort of wanted to talk about before sort of jumping into the actual panel session is, you know, I made this comment yesterday that we can't just buy a digital twin. It's not something that we just go and purchase off the shelf. It's something that we have to build and develop together. And I'll talk about the concept of sharing data, establishing the right policies to get these, you know, the benefits that can come from digital twins, the need to convert analog processes to digital workflows, complex algorithms and the ethics behind them, and the accuracy of them, and all these sort of different components of when we use automated algorithms. And obviously that the need to collaborate across a whole range of different stakeholders. You can't just have a digital twin from a government level. It needs to be involved the private sector, the community, all levels of government, etc., to actually bring, you know, a digital twin to life. And it's only when we actually put all these pieces together that the real and digital worlds can interact together. And then the outcome of that is a really powerful twin, a powerful digital twin, which, you know, has so many different benefits to communities, and hopefully today we'll work through some of those different use cases that you know, are relevant to regional and growing suburbs. So I'll just hand back to, I think, Maureen to run the panel, and look forward to participating.
That's excellent. Thanks, Adam. It gives us a good oversight on, you know, what digital twins are and how they function. And I guess your example is inner urbans, which leads me to the question that I want to start, you know, this discussion with is, and it's open to everybody. Do you believe that digital twinning is only applicable to inner urban built environments, as it's commonly seen as a tool for twinning existing built form?
Go, Bronwen, I can see you reacting.
Sure, I'm happy to kick off, and thanks for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the members of growth area councils. I think there's an obvious benefit to being able to plan based on existing scenarios from perhaps established or recently established greenfield sites, and to make sure that when communities are built, that they are equipped with the right sort of infrastructure and sensors and monitors to make sure that we can continue to adapt and modify communities and neighbourhoods and designs as they evolve. So I think there's an absolute great opportunity to make use of scenarios and to make sure we're doing it right as communities are being built.
So Melanie.
Yeah, if I could follow on, I think one of the key things that I think about, I've been looking at regional livability now for the past few years, and I think we've got to talk a little bit of the elephant in the room, which is internet access, because this all works really well in cities that have got great internet, and we can use the sensors, we've got the technology, the infrastructure to work with, but what happens when we don't? That's one of the first things I think about with regional cities.
That's a great point. What about Paul, what would your thoughts be on that? You're on mute, Paul. Paul, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Got it, sorry.
There you go.
I sort of told myself I was going to do that, but there you go. Hopefully the first time, only time. Look, certainly I think, you know, in terms of the value, this type of work certainly has a lot of value for Greenfields. I think, you know, as someone who's a practitioner in the Greenfield, I recognise that it's probably something that we haven't used as much as maybe established urban areas. But I think we've, you know, some people might say, you know, our Greenfields is a, you know, is a blank slate. You know, there's not a great deal there, and maybe you don't need it as much. But you know, I'd say that actually many of the problems and pitfalls and reworks that we've had to do in the past on our planning is because we haven't had the quality information that would be useful. So I'd certainly say that it is highly applicable for greenfield areas. And I think moving forward, I think the image from the Pete image earlier of a sort of a strategic plan and the beginning of using sort of that digital framework, it actually would form the basis of what you would say, a permanent set of information for a particular area to manage its growth over decades. So, you know, one of the points I'd make is that maybe one of the observations I make, maybe we need to think about how we start the digital twinning process. You know, we talked about access to the internet, access to data. We need to think about, well, are there ways we can start it off with relatively small amounts of data, start with information that'll address the low-hanging fruit, and we build up and we make it modular and build it up over time. So it doesn't have to be the big grand thing that we may not ever quite complete in one hit, that we use it as an evolving thing and an everyday tool. So certainly for greenfield areas, yeah.
That's a good point, because I guess, Kelly, a lot of people will be wondering, how does a council deal with that type of data? You know, it's an enormous amount of data to collate and filtrate back out to the right parties. How would council deal with that?
Thanks, Maureen, and great question. And again, terrific to be here today. Look, I think fundamentally, you know, the digital twin really provides, as well as the sort of broader smart city agenda, provides that opportunity to really facilitate better planning, design and modelling for future needs, but also being able to actually fast track some of those things in support of developer interests as well, to get better planning outcomes. I think in terms of how we'd handle the data, you know, it's incredibly important, I think, that local government's engaged at the beginning of the development of the digital twin. We're certainly, as a council, really proactive in this space, and we've done quite a bit of work in the past through the establishment of our Smart City Office. But I think from a local government perspective, this is really about changing the livability of cities. It's about really ensuring that we make better planning decisions, quicker planning decisions, but we also have the technology to really be able to map and predict and manage traffic flows, you know, just as an example. So you look at cities like Singapore that have done this incredibly well. I think there's a great opportunity to look at growth cities as a focus for this sort of development moving forward. And, you know, it's fundamentally, as I said, about changing the livability. It's also, you know, there's some financial challenges that can be, you know, something that we need to deal with. So data capture is obviously more expensive in sort of our context, but we need to sort of look at how we could apply that, you know, in a really efficient way. I also think one of the other important aspects to digital twins, and really a lot of the work in the smart cities space, is how you use digital twins as an opportunity for community engagement. And we certainly did that with the project that Dr. Adam Mowlam led with the Win Lens. And the purpose of that, of course, was also about really looking at how you did use this sort of technology, but also as a way to engage and, you know, show people what it was going to look like, you know, those future developments. So I think it's an incredibly powerful opportunity, but something that, you know, I think inherently is about better system delivery in terms of the transport network, better planning and building approvals. I think there's a whole lot that can be really well applied in the local government context, particularly, as I said, in a growth city setting.
That's really pointed to your area, Melanie, I think, because, you know, the idea of livability, that's exactly what you focus on.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is really important. And I guess it gets to a big issue, I think, that comes to smart cities, is we have to think about the why. What's the reason we're doing this? What's the theory behind it? What outcomes are we trying to change? Because it's amazing technology and it's brilliant, we can bring it together. But if we're not connecting that to the purpose and what we're trying to achieve, which Kelly's just gotten to, I think that's really important, because smart cities don't have to be kind cities. They don't have to be fair cities. They don't have to be livable cities. They're just smart. We want them more than smart. We want them smart and livable. So that connection to this and trying to think about what we're trying to achieve with this technology is critical. Often I find that you'll have people who are thinking about one aspect, but they won't be thinking about another. And it really brings the need to engage with community, to have multidisciplines involved in this work as well, so they don't just become technical focused and we lose sight of the bigger picture. I think that's really important.
Yeah. If I may, Maureen, just on the livability angle and just tying back to Greenfields, one of the things that I think is really important, one of the challenges in Greenfield development is creation of a sense of place and a sense of community. And maybe that's where, you know, maybe it's seen in established areas, this type of tool is about thinking about the impact of development and change on livability. The potential in newly establishing areas is to better understand local conditions, landform, what's around, to actually assist in creation of that sense of place, and also to model how these places might look. So I think that's a really potentially strong benefit, and maybe a slightly different nuance about how it might be used in that setting compared to established areas.
Totally agree. I think, Bronwen, given that it's recognised that 1/5 of Australian population lives in councils on the outskirts of our major cities, and that this is where our major greenfield development is occurring, do you think the digital twinning would allow these councils to better manage their growth and interaction with the major cities, which is, I guess, what we've just been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And something that, you know, is a significant change that we're seeing in 2020, really, and it will have long-term implications, is this geographic shift of employment. So, you know, there are an enormous number of people currently working from home. It looks like almost all of us are at the moment. During lockdown, we did a survey of people in growth areas across all of the capital cities, and 3 in 5 of the people currently working from home during lockdown want to stay that way, you know, work either close to home or at home for at least part of their working week. So this is an opportunity to really shift the design of neighbourhoods and towns, and to make sure they're fit for purpose in a new way. So, you know, I think there's a few ways that can be done. And one is around using digital twins to actually improve that workplace productivity. So it's those local business services, that local information that people need to be able to do their job well, wherever they are, and it might be at their kitchen table or in a co-working space. So, you know, what are those opportunities to use data to increase that capacity for productivity? Another way is around, you know, as we've seen in a lot of digital twin scenarios, of increasing that local economic engagement as well. So making sure that if there are a lot more people living and spending their days in their newly established suburb, for example, they're not spending hours commuting, then they've got a lot more money left in their pocket at the end of the day, because they're not spending, you know, upwards of $20, $30 a day driving to work and paying tolls and parking. So what does that mean for local retail, other services that might be needed locally? So how can we use digital twins to increase that local economic activity? And finally, bringing it back to councils is, again, it's the fit for purpose design of community facilities. So if the nature and their usage is changing significantly with a lot more people on site during the working week, what does that mean for local government, and how can we plan and build that better?
Bron, I think that's a really great point. And I think one of the things that this offers is to really highlight that, you know, that data and precision modelling is really just as important as bricks and mortar. And I think, you know, refocusing the emphasis around technology as being an important component of building cities. So it isn't just about, you know, roads and buildings. We need to really think about how we integrate technology into that and use data, obviously, to help inform some of those decisions. But it is critically important that we make that investment. And I think that's certainly something, you know, councils like ourselves at Wyndham are doing, and a number of other large councils. And I do think, again, it's particularly important in a growth municipality where you've got competing challenges and, you know, the need to kind of fast track and move quickly to ensure that livability is, you know, enhanced and ultimately, you know, creating the sort of environment that people want to live in. We know that information's power, and technology really does need to be embedded in every major infrastructure project. So I think we really need to start thinking about this in a much more strategic way. I'd also make one final comment there about the governance of things. And, you know, I think there's an opportunity. I talked a little bit about the cost earlier, you know, around sort of data analytics and so on. But the reality is there's so much opportunity here to really streamline and integrate and better align policy across, you know, federal, state and local governments, working alongside the private sector to really get the best public value possible. And I think that's what this presents an opportunity for us to do moving forward as well. So I think there's some absolute, you know, wins in this, and, you know, from a digital sort of twinning perspective, but that broader smart city focus overall in terms of how we create those places that are really well integrated, connected, and providing the end user, which is essentially a community member, the opportunity to access data in real time, and also even imagine what their new home's going to look like, engage in that process in terms of working with developers to look at, future communities. So incredibly exciting, but something I think local government really does need to partner closely with state on, but also some of those private sectors as well, and some of those agencies like the UDIA, VPA and others who are really closely involved in designing cities of the future, and obviously also improving livability of existing urban areas as well.
That's a great point. I think Adam and Paul, you probably have some ideas on, the framework and governance of how the digital twin sort of infiltrates into that.
Yeah, I'm happy to go just on that one if you want. I think just picking what Adam mentioned earlier, actually, about the open data, I think that's absolutely critical. I know when I first sort of started working in state government, it's got better. But, even, between departments, you have to sign your life away to get data. You think we're all in government. Why do I have to pay or, sign confidentiality agreements for data, which is basic, or considered to be basic, useful tool. But it is certainly the open data policies in government have certainly improved that. But I think that needs to be, it needs to be within government, state government, councils and industry, private industry. We probably all need to be a little bit more, it can be a balance between that, about privacy and probity, but also where we can, just freeing up and sharing the information, because that's really where the power of this tool will come in. And it is a tool. So, and we want to make the tool fit for purpose. And if it's not fit for purpose, it'll only be used, or it won't, only be partly used, or it won't be used to its full effect. And so we need to, and in terms of the technology might be there for information flow, we need to get the governance structures in place so that information flows correctly. So we reduce the picking up on the cost issue. The more, maintaining the system, setting it up might be the easy bit, maintaining it is the hard bit. Melanie would know I've been involved in setting up the metropolitan open space mapping when I was involved in that, and that was done in 2016. Still very useful, but it's slowly but surely we come out of date because it needs maintenance and resourcing. If there are ways we can make that more automated and less costly and more systemic across governments, then I think we will start to really embrace the power of this, potential of this tool.
And Adam, you've got a real, idea on how that all works with Fisherman's Bend.
Yeah, I think there's, it's funny, when Fisherman's Bend started, that was pre-COVID, and I think there's elements around policy frameworks, etc., that can be really fleshed out through digital twins. I find it's a fascinating piece where our cities are changing drastically, and the existence of a digital twin allows us to test different policy decisions. I mean, we've all sort of seen the stuff that's happening in the city of Melbourne to reinvigorate the city around on-street bars and cafes and all that sort of stuff. Now, what does that mean in terms of the real world, in terms of sun angles and shadows and people movement and traffic implications and all that sort of stuff? So the existence of a strong and deep digital twin allows us to really go back and back test some of these policy decisions to make sure that the outcomes are actually what we're seeking to achieve, and also embed a higher degree of transparency with the stakeholders who are going to be impacted. We can say, okay, well, this is what's going to happen because this is the inputs that are coming in, and we've seen this through various different studies around, say, air quality and stuff like that. So you sit there and say, okay, if a cruise ship stationed at a particular port for a certain amount of time, then this is the impact on air quality, and then you can start to embed that into your policies and all that sort of stuff, so you can make sure that you can use that outcome that you're seeking to align how policies are designed in an intelligent and planned way.
It's interesting because a lot of people think that, bringing in a smart city means that we're all going to be living with cameras around us watching what we're doing and things like that. But is it as simple as that?
Look, I think every jurisdiction's got got their opinions on CCTV cameras and the likes. I think there's an amazing array of sensors that can deliver equal types of information without cameras. Often they use CCTV cameras for traffic monitoring. Now, you can get that type of information from probably three or four different types of technologies without any invasion of privacy. So, that's not saying that that cameras won't play a role. I think they will, but you've got to make sure that privacy and security principles are built in by design at the start. And if you haven't done that appropriately, then don't start with cameras. That's as simple as that from a smart city perspective. I think that privacy and security is front and center in terms of a really strong smart city program, and that needs to be sorted through and before CCTV or camera technology comes about. The same goes for drones and satellite imagery, not just CCTV. We've also got to deal with some of the privacy implications, around the data that's collected through phones and all that sort of stuff. That's as equally as powerful and intrusive as cameras.
That brings me to you, Melanie. How does your organisation, capture data? And people have this fear of a loss of privacy, which I think is probably not true.
Yeah, well, I think this is a whole area, right, that we could talk for a long time. And that idea of using sensors and people being watched. I'm sure there's many of you that would have watched that Netflix documentary recently about social media. And you think one of the things I find fascinating is that people give information every day without realizing it. And that's not really for, well, some could argue, as much good, but this is a way of actually taking data and using it to really design cities very well. But it does raise ethical issues, and I think we have to connect ethics into this conversation. How we teach people, whether it be in technology, computer science, to have an understanding of why these might raise ethical concerns for people. They've got great application potential. Recently, we've just had a paper published on age-friendly city planning, and one of the issues in there, you can see how the use of technology could be so important in new developments. So going down to the very beginning, with developers, so they design houses to think about the future, not just children and families, but the longer term implications. But one of the issues I think is really important to raise here is that this is really expensive. And Adam, you touched on this. This is really, really expensive to do. Within our work within the Australian Urban Observatory, we're using spatial data to produce indicators of livability down to the neighbourhood level. It's taking us years to come up with this information. And then, as Paul said, we've got to keep it updated. So next year, we're going to do another 2 years of data release to update this to see change over time. But it also raises another issue for me is that one used to be, I couldn't get LGA level data in Victoria, let alone Australia. Now we need data across the country to do this. That's another whole challenge. The inputs that we use to produce this information, data quality, data access, these are huge, issues that come along with the production. The other thing is the willingness to use it. So I know in terms of my work, often you can have people who are scared to even look at a map, let alone interact with the technology. Yeah. So these are different levels of issues that we kind of have to bring into this. And I know I'm working with Joe Hurley and Marco Amati, who've been using the Urban Monitor data produced by DELWP and OEH in New South Wales. And they have been really producing that tree canopy information that we have been wanting to produce at a national level. It is prohibitively expensive to use that and to produce that data. So I think we've got to bring that in here because these are challenges and we really got to think about this in the big picture too.
I think that's a really good point. One of the things that I can focus on, particularly when you look at, growth cities and how you engage with communities, is that it's about sharing knowledge and understanding the why factor. I think as governments, we should be enablers in this space, but the reality is that we're often working at cross purposes because we've got the privacy policy, we've got a whole layer of things that, can somehow sort of undermine this work going forward. And I think that's why there has to be a compelling narrative about why this is important for livability, and again, sort of demonstrating its value and its importance at that local level, so it really does become tangible and meaningful. Because I think if you're talking with people about the reason why you'd have sensors in place or cameras, if people understand the why and how it does enhance livability and it changes a raft of things, then, you know, we can start redirecting that thinking, and also aligning government policy to ensure that it's actually it's an enabler of smart city, you know, development and technology rather than an inhibitor. And I think that's, you know, fundamentally what we need to come back to in how we frame up smart city responses or strategies is really about, you know, how we engage with community on that journey, so people are clear about the benefit realisation, not just in terms of the cost of the infrastructure investment, but also why it's important, and, you know, the benefits that literally come from that. I think sometimes we spend a lot of money on specific projects, you know, in different jurisdictions, you know, be that in a local government context and so on. Whereas if we had, you know, a broader kind of alignment around, you know, where the investment is going to make a difference around that sort of livability, beating growth areas or whatever, that spend is much more beneficial and has, you know, genuine currency in terms of being able to improve, you know, day-to-day livability. So I think for me, you know, we have to really think about that kind of community engagement, education piece, the why, and also how we actually govern and bring partners and others, you know, community members on that journey as well, and then have the right policy settings, of course, to make it happen.
Yeah.
We've got, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
I was going to say, without sort of getting into the technical detail or technology side of things, this is where standards and interoperability really becomes important. You know, our ability to sweat data assets and get as much value out of them and return on investment is critically important. And, you know, we've all seen things like aerial photography and stuff like that. But, you know, I would say that some of the prohibitively expensive actions that we've taken in the past, like, you know, mapping vegetation for urban heat, as an example, is something that we can do now through machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, that requires us to work together to get the best algorithms and highest accuracy responses. But we do have an opportunity with technology now to really, like I said, sweat these data assets and get the most value out of them. And I think that they then become a really compelling use case. And, you know, the same would go for, you know, sensors around traffic and stuff like that. You know, we've all been stuck in traffic jams and all that sort of stuff. Now, that ability to optimize that type of network through sensor technology, not just the design of the road or the placement of the road, but then how do we make sure that that asset is actually delivering the best value that it possibly can?
There are some interesting questions on the web, on the chat line. So one's from Christopher Boddy, and he says, you know, getting back to this idea of cost, will it cost any more for our community or taxpayers to implement digital twins or smart cities across Australia? I don't know if we're able to answer that question, but does anyone want to have a go at it? Nobody, I didn't think that we'd probably want to answer that, but I think...
maybe I'll just say, like look, a lot of things, anyone who's probably in the industry or government, it's weighing up the costs and benefits, and that's a challenge. It's always a challenge if something's got a upfront immediate cost and the long-term gains are dispersed. So that's probably the key challenge. So, you know, if technology improves and overall it becomes cheaper to implement, then the proposition potentially becomes an easier proposition. But certainly, yeah, that is a hurdle. But I think I will reinforce, it's the setting up and it's the maintenance, because if it's not maintained, it'll lose value and people will stop using it. So we have to be very clear about but going back to earlier discussion, what's the purpose? What do you want to get out of it?
And can I just add in there, I think we need to take that broader view of it as well. So obviously the costs of the technology itself, but also the opportunity cost of sticking with the analog way of doing things. And you know, I think of an example from Southwest Sydney with some of our members, and you know, planning and securing funding for health services, for example, for a community that is only just arriving, is very difficult because those funding decisions are made on retrospective data. So an analogue way that some councils try and secure funding is through the old-fashioned conversation and happenstance and anecdotal evidence, whereas with an investment in the digital version of monitoring well-being and health in the community, for example, that can bring about a much faster response from government in terms of funding. You know, I'm thinking of youth mental health services, for example. How can you, without any data, secure funding for a new community with 1,500 people between 12 and 18 years of age? If we had a digital twin and we were monitoring those spaces where young people congregate, or we were monitoring security problems or school attendance data was being shared, and, you know, all those sorts of things, we'd have a much clearer picture a lot faster of where that need is in a community. So I think, you know, if we compare the costs, the long-term costs of an analog versus a digital way, I think it's a, you know, smart investment.
I guess it's also putting money towards that, you know, that concept of livability again. And if we are creating better environments, then the money saved in the long term can be considered, can't it? Because we're not spending money on vandalism, you know, fixing vandalism and all sorts of things that we're dealing with because we haven't designed, you know, according to what the public and what, you know, what we really need as a community.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, Maureen, and I think, you know, our understanding of livability is really guided by the social determinants of health, which talk about that where you live, where you learn, where you work, where you play, where you're born, your postcode, where you age, these are all influencing your long-term health outcomes. So that if we don't start thinking about this now, we're going to be paying for it in the longer term, not just in terms of retrofitting what we did not so well previously, but there is that economic cost to this bad planning, if it so was to exist, or the idea of not embracing technology. So we just got to take these sources now and try and think about how this is going to help us in the future.
That's a great point. I think, Peter, we've got some questions on the chat line that you might want to run through in case we miss out on some time for that.
Maureen, yes, we do. We have a question here in respect to planning practitioners and how can planning practitioners, the planning professional in general, catch up with the necessary upskilling to be able to address smart cities, considering that planners are right at that front end and considering these greenfield outcomes and master planning areas. From the panel's perspective, where do you see us? Because it's got to be both. At the moment, if private sector isn't able and consulting isn't up to speed, we're going to have a problem, aren't we?
As a practitioner, I might kick off. Look, I'd say, look, one of the things, you know, in my work and my colleagues, and I think it's in the, you know, in this world, there's people are under time pressure, busy, the important, urgent trumps other things often. So I'm probably coming back to the fact that those that are focused on the actual tool, the technology, if there are ways to make it simpler, easier to use, it will be used more. And I'm not saying, you know, a good tool is one that's fit for purpose, it's ready at hand, and it's robust. And if you've got those things, people will use them. And word of mouth will take over. You know, what are you doing wasting time on that? That you can, you know, if people know they can save time, they can get better information and make better decisions based on evidence and a bit of science rather than the anecdotes that we talked earlier. I think people will take them up. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, I've been involved in plans where there's been significant time wasted in rework, or, you know, the penny drops. If only we'd known that earlier, if we'd had that better information. And we're doing work earlier, trying to do more work up front in our planning, involving more technology, better mapping, doing some 3D work, but we've got a long way to go. So I think in terms of uptake from planning professionals, it has to be put together in a way where informed professionals can readily use it. Maybe there still needs to be training and people need to be practiced at it, but maybe just like, you know, most people probably can have a go at using a spreadsheet for all the basic functions, and then we know there are some absolute, high-end users that can do all the bells and whistles. But for everyday use, it's a good tool for many people. So I think we just need to get the technology to that point where, the everyday users can use, 50, 60, 70% of the power of it, which will be good for most purposes. And if they need the extra, they can go to the experts and maybe pay the experts.
Well, I sort of see it being completely transformational, really, in terms of day-to-day planning approvals, because so much of it can be done, using the digital twin in that sort of virtual context. Automating of processes, quicker approvals. Even so far as looking at sort of building designs and facades and so on. Like, I just see so many potential flow-ons in terms of really optimising the value work then that we have planners focused on, rather than that churn.
And I think that's a really good point. Again, speaking to my colleagues, we'd rather, most planners, most of the times, most people would rather spend the time on the things that they're passionate about. I'd rather spend more time thinking about the places that I'm involved in creating, rather than the frustration of finding information.
As an entire sort of ecosystem and that sort of livable, place, instead of, some of that more laborious task associated with those approvals. And, even just at a kind of low level, you can sort of see the benefit of that as well, and how you then sort of the flow on, I guess, impacts of that within the private sector as well. And, cost savings, I guess, from, we were talking earlier about the cost benefit, of this and the investment in data. Is being costly, and of course it is in terms of the infrastructure component as well, but just the cost savings of those, streamlining of processes and, that fast tracking and automation just seem to me, endless really in terms of possibilities. You can make a difference in terms of a workforce.
And just one to add to this conversation too, being probably the only academic on the board or the panel, is that I think we need to think about how we're teaching our planners, right? Because the other thing is, and this goes back to that kind of interdisciplinary idea, that if you only have people doing urban planning who have nothing to do with technology, and then suddenly in practice you have to come together, I think, the way we teach, we can think about, changing that and bringing technology, maybe bringing digital twins into the practice of urban planning at the teaching level too. Because if we're going to make that real change, we've got to work with the people coming up into these new careers too.
That's a great point. And I think if we're looking at, from a design perspective, as an urban designer, if we can lock in or tap into a network of information very quickly that gives us, layer upon layer of what that site actually includes, what are the neighbourhoods around it in a 3D format, what is the built form around me that I'm dealing with, or even Bronwen, with open space and what is it that we're building and how is it going to look and what is, my design looking like sitting next to someone else's design next door, and I can see that in a 3D mesh. I think it's an incredible way to move forward. And I think Adam...
Sorry, Adam, last point. What if we could see a PSP, a precinct structure plan, in a smart city digital twin version? Wouldn't that be leaps and bounds ahead?
No, I wouldn't say it was leaps and bounds ahead. it's quite possible. I think, the important thing when we talk about digital twins and PSPs is also to think about the long-term capabilities, not so you want to make sure that the impacts moving forward are captured in a digital twin, not just as a one-off development exercise. It's how do you manage a city or a township or a development as things change. Just on the commentary that's been going on around skills uplift, I definitely think that Australia is actually doing really well in digital twins. It's got some leading exponents of it and some wonderful use cases that have been developed, and digital technology is not going to go away, so we need to make sure that there is significant efforts done to make sure that the systems are easy to use and that we can maximise these digital twins. And that requires a whole range of different skill uplifts, everything from requirements gathering when we put these specifications together to actually the usability of these systems, so that the end user, right down to the community, is actually getting a hold of this digital information and making decisions that impact on their lives.
Sorry, Peter, did you want to ask a question from the chat?
I was just going to say that we're getting close to our time here. There's more questions that are flowing in at the moment.
Yep.
But I'd just like to perhaps make one comment before we just come to our final question, and that is from an investment perspective and that development community perspective. One of the things they're looking for is certainty in terms of when and if and how, and what they need to deliver, and that's one of the powers I think we will get as we get this. We can get data that's flowing and giving us all the exact information that we need to make decisions on. Those conditions that say do this, the 300th lot or whatever it might be, become certain, because we'll be creating things for the community as they need it and growing the community and addressing the issues that they need and the health and so forth within them. So to the panelists, as we conclude, what advice can you give developers and councils out there on how to integrate the digital twin platform to existing and new projects, do you think, at this point?
Well, I suppose there's just an element of embracing a creative mindset as much as anything else. And, you know, I think there's so much innovation really and lateral thinking in across local government, because it's not only from a planner's perspective, but it's, you know, all the other elements within a whose work will be heavily impacted by the initial planning of a development. So I think harnessing all of that expertise across councils would be a really useful and creative way to embed that sort of thinking in a digital twin exercise.
I might just say, again, I'll probably maybe sound a little bit broken on this. I think that certainly developers and councils and, you know, state government agencies need to be looking more closely at this and how it can benefit their work, and, you know, what wins it can give them. But I think then it's important to not hold on to that. If it's going to work, if someone gets a good win and actually develops and has a system that's working, share it, open it up, consider partnering with something else, and particularly councils, and particularly regional councils where individual councils don't have the resources. Why couldn't we see a whole region of councils partnering up and sharing the costs and experimenting with different aspects? And maybe that's what I'm thinking. We've got to be out there experimenting and sharing the learnings and being open to this, because we'll all ultimately benefit. I think that's probably the advice I give, because I think that's the biggest risk. Everyone holding on to their own data in some form and not sharing, that'll hold us back.
Yeah, I think at the start I mentioned that cities are complex, and that's, you know, everything from Melbourne CBD, Fisherman's Bend, to all the way out to our small rural townships in reality. And I think the key part, or the key capability of digital twins is bringing together all types of different data and different information to understand you know, different functions across the city. So I think the key part is the collaboration side of things. You know, without that, you know, everything from data standards to policy development to sharing of technology, you know, the big benefits of digital twins aren't going to be realised without collaboration.
I'd say that there's 3 points I wanted to make to this, but I'll be quick. One is start slowly, right? That you don't have to go straight to digital twin, even if it's starting to work with data, appreciate data. And this is where I'd plug our own work in terms of indicators of livability within the Australian Urban Observatory. It's still starting to use data for these processes and then moving up. The second, I agree completely with Callie about bring community with you on the journey. This is not just for an internal purpose, but this needs to be shared. And, you know, COVID's a great example how communication is so important. It's not just having it, but communicating and sharing and using it. And the third one would be to say, don't lose sight of what you came to achieve. So keep that theory connected to what you're doing.
Brilliant. Have you got anything that you'd like to add, Kelly? I think we'd want to hear what Wyndham thinks about this.
Oh, look, I think I'd concur with all of those views that have been expressed. And if I could just say too, we can't underestimate the power of local government, you know, really being a kind of key influencer in this space and also a key partner, not just as a level of government, but as I said, to just ensure safe passage of this sort of work, you know, and I talk about the sort of enabling policy environment, for instance, but also recognising just the power of these tools and this sort of planning work as it relates to how we engage with community. So, you know, I just leave by saying that you've got the visual aspects of this are so powerful, particularly when you're dealing with communities of, you know, culturally diverse backgrounds, people that have come, you know, into new communities, that they can see, you know, things in their communities in a different way visually, and also understanding the use of data, I think is really something that needs to be shared across communities. So I think that's quite important as well.
Well, I think that's all we have time for, and I'm sure Adam's ready to just quickly take over and kick us off the web.
Oh, Maureen, what a great conversation. As a retired planner from many years ago, I found that conversation fantastic. I loved it. I wanted to keep listening, but we can't. We do need to bring things to a close. Maureen and Peter, thank you so much for facilitating that session. To Adam and Melanie and Paul and Kelly, thanks so much for joining us. What a great sort of representation of sectors and geographies and professions that we had on this panel. Thank you so much again for joining us. Just very quickly, for those that are sort of interested in digging deeper, going further, we have another 2 sessions today. We also, of course, tomorrow have our digital twin strategy workshops. I come together with your fellow policymakers, practitioners and academics to continue to build and co-create this draft digital twin strategy that we've been evolving for the last few months for our region here in Australia and New Zealand. As I mentioned earlier, the Digital Twin Challenge, I'd love to make sure that as one of our 10 projects that get into that challenge, we have a good Greenfields or sort of regional project in there. We're after 5 cities and 5 state, territory, regional agencies to join that challenge. The registration of interest is there. Please head to the Digital Twin Hub. And for our Smart Cities enthusiasts more broadly who might be on the line, the Smart Cities Awards opened yesterday. Make sure you check those out. In a year of crisis, we want to recognise and reward leadership, and we can't wait to see some of the submissions that come through with that. That's about it at the moment. Digital Twin Week keeps going. Maureen, Peter, the panel, thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having us.